everyone. The News Nation is following breaking news. We are anticipating new polls in the presidential race, perhaps in the next 48 hours, taking a closer look at those key battleground states. This as Mitt Romney seeks to build his momentum from last week's debate, and President Obama focusing on what he called this weekend the American people who carried him forward despite mistakes made in 2008. Now, one new poll was released in just the past hour. That is the new Gallup Daily Tracking Poll. It shows President Obama and Mitt Romney now tied 47%. Romney erasing the 5-point lead the president had before the debates. Now, as for the campaigns today, right now, President Obama is about to make modern history. The president is in California, where he'll unveil a national monument in honor of Cesar Chavez, who led the farm worker movement. Now, it will be, by the way, the first national monument since the 1700s to honor a Latino. The unveiling of that comes as, of course, the Latino vote heavily skewed toward the president. The issue, though, is enthusiasm. So we know this visit today in California with this national monument is a big one for the president. As for Governor Romney, he took direct aim at President Obama's handling of foreign policy during a speech today at the Virginia Military Institute. It, by the way, if you're counting, the 10th foreign policy speech of Romney's campaign.
When we look at the Middle East today, with Iran closer than ever to nuclear weapons capability, with the conflict in Syria threatening to destabilize the region, and with violent extremists on the march, and with an American ambassador and 3 others dead, likely at the hands of al-Qaeda affiliates, it's clear that the risk of conflict in the region is higher now than when the president took office. I know the president hopes for a safer, freer, and more prosperous Middle East allied with us. I share this hope. But hope is not a strategy.
Let me bring in our News Nation political panel. Democratic strategist Chris Kofinas, nationally syndicated radio talk show host and MSNBC contributor Michael Smerconish, Jonathan Leggio, communications director for American Crossroads, a Republican super PAC co-founded by Karl Rove, and Bobby Ghosh, deputy international editor for Time magazine. Jonathan Leggio, let me start off with you. We've heard Governor Romney's speech. We saw excerpts before the speech. The hope line is the one that's being replayed so much. But what is the major failure of the Obama administration that Republicans and Romney are referring to?
Well, I think he's talking about what just happened in this fiasco in Libya. I mean, I think that the president, Governor Romney, last week had a very, very good week talking about the economy. They want to define what's going to be talked about this week, specifically on the foreign policy front. The House Oversight Committee is going to have a hearing about what went on in Libya in the security side leading up to that attack on that consulate there. And I think that that's really what he wants to set the stage for. If they're going to be talking about foreign policy this week, he wants to be able to define the terms on which we're having that debate. Because
words matter. You started off with saying, I think. That's what Governor Romney was talking about, an ongoing investigation into what happened in Libya. Obviously a great concern, but you could not answer that question with certainty of what epic failure Governor Romney and Republicans believe has happened over the past 4 years under this president's leadership, under Secretary of State Hillary Clinton here. And that, I think, is still unclear even after that 25-minute speech just a couple of hours ago.
Well, I think he made the case that the Middle East is not more stable now than it was 4 years ago, and that in itself is a failure. I think that that's what he wants to be talking about. He made the case that terrorism is on a low ebb, that we don't have to worry about al-Qaeda anymore, and then we just had an attack on a U.S. consulate. The administration didn't even want to call it terrorism. It took them 14 days to admit that it was a coordinated terror attack, and I think that that's what he wants to be talking about. Is, well, why wasn't the administration straight with the American people about what happened against the consulate there?
Chris Kofinas, let me bring you in on this. I thought this was a remarkable moment this morning on the Daily Rundown with Chuck Todd. The Romney campaign talking a lot about what they say is the case to be made for failures, but ask a key question whether Hosni Mubarak should have been supported or not. The foreign policy advisor, Ambassador Richard Williamson, was on with Chuck. Let me play what happened.
It was a mistake.
Pushing Mubarak out was the mistake?
All right, let me give you the answer. First of all, for 2 years, President Obama cut support of U.S. assistance for democracy and civil society in Egypt. So those who eventually went to Tahrir Square saw that the United States wasn't in their side. That was a mistake. There's a big difference between anticipating and leading versus not leading, reacting, cutting our traditional support for democracy. That's the record of President Obama, and that contributed to the mess.
So was Mubarak. So you're saying he should have pushed Mubarak out but done it differently, or he shouldn't have done that?
The people in the country, Ronald Reagan once said that we should support the March of Freedom, but we can't determine its pace. The people in the country determine the pace of the March of Freedom. It's hubris to suggest that the United States can determine this, but we should be clear we're on the side of the forces of freedom. We failed that test.
So is it hubris then to make an assertion but no answer? Because that is essentially what seemed to have happened in that exchange with Chuck Todd, Chris.
Well, if anyone ever doubts that, foreign policy and who advises candidates doesn't matter, all they have to do is watch that interview. I mean, this is the stakes at hand in terms of foreign policy. Listen, there's two ways to look at this, I think. On the policy side, Governor Romney's critiques are wrong. The president has done a remarkable job in terms of getting us out of Iraq, setting us up for withdrawal out of Afghanistan, killing Osama bin Laden, dismantling al-Qaeda. I mean, those are incredible accomplishments by any standard. If this was a Republican president, I can guarantee you Republicans would be out there crowing about what an incredible record he has on foreign policy. But on the other side, the strategic front, I have no idea what the Republicans are doing or Governor Romney's doing. If they think they're going to win a foreign policy debate with the president, they are sorely mistaken.
Bobby, let me bring you in. The key is, and we say here, the great contrast. There are many things that are starkly different with Governor Romney and President Obama. But again and again, you see Romney advisors pressed on what are the differences? What changes would you make? What decisions would be explicitly different than the Obama administration? And I don't want to say you get crickets, but you saw the exchange with the ambassador who hesitated to say what he would have advised Romney to do with Hosni Mubarak.
There's not a great deal that they have different. The speech that Governor Romney gave this morning was not aimed at the foreign policy establishment. It wasn't aimed at people like me. He was trying to do, it was a political speech. As a foreign policy speech, I'll give him 4 on 10. As a political speech, I'll give him 9 on 10. He was trying to do two things. He was trying to look presidential, which means you show that you have a grasp of international affairs. And he was trying to prove that he was tougher than the incumbent, which is very hard to do because he really isn't. But he plays the Syria card as a way of appearing tougher than the president.
But the difference is here. I mean, you heard Jonathan Colegio bring up the investigation into Libya. We know that the administration seemed to stumble and stammer throughout that throughout the early details, and Romney fairly did the same thing with his early jump to get